The subtle battle. As James stepped back into the city's vibrant night, he paused on the sidewalk, illuminated by streetlights casting long shadows against the pavement. The usual symphony of urban life, honking horns, the chatter of pedestrians, and the hum of distant traffic, played around him. Yet James's mind buzzed louder. It was supposed to be a night of quiet victory, a time to reflect on his journey from the son of factory workers to a renowned attorney, whose name now commanded respect in courtrooms across the country. But Étoile Noire had turned a moment of triumph into a reminder that some battles never truly ended. He walked slowly toward his parked car, hands clenched in his pockets as he replayed the events of the evening. The dismissive waiter, the mocking laughter, the way other diners had subtly but unmistakably questioned his right to occupy that space. James was no stranger to microaggressions. As a black man navigating elite spaces, he'd learned to recognize the coded language and unspoken judgments that often simmered beneath polite facades. But tonight had crossed a line. "Smile through it, son," his father's voice echoed in his memory, a lesson imparted during countless childhood talks. "They'll try to make you feel small, but your dignity, that's yours to protect." James had honored that advice throughout his life, but dignity didn't mean silence. Dignity, in his book, often meant standing tall and pushing back against injustice in ways that left a lasting impact. He unlocked his car, sat behind the wheel, and stared at the sleek dashboard without turning on the engine. The hum of the city faded as he mapped out his next steps. His victory in court just days ago was a testament to what could be achieved when meticulous preparation met righteous determination. The tools he had honed in the legal arena were about to be wielded again, this time against Étoile Noire. James opened his phone and pulled up his notes app. He began typing furiously, documenting every detail. 7:45 p.m. Reservation confirmed, seated at corner table. 7:50 p.m. Notice stares from nearby tables, patrons whispering. 8:10 p.m. Waiter displayed dismissive behavior, delayed service despite attentiveness to other diners. 8:30 p.m. Heard mocking comments from staff at the bar. Recorded portion of conversation. 8:50 p.m. Final insult. Laughter at exit, mimicking gesture noted. Evidence. Always gather evidence. He scrolled through his contacts and tapped the name of a trusted colleague, Marissa Green, a fierce litigator known for her unyielding pursuit of justice in discrimination cases. "Hey James," Marissa answered brightly. "Late night call. What's up?" "I need your help," James said without preamble. "Ever heard of Étoile Noire?" "Of course. Fancy place. Food any good?" "Didn't get to enjoy it much," James said dryly. "Listen, I was there tonight, and let's just say they made it clear I wasn't welcome. I recorded part of it, but I need to know what legal options we have. Public accommodation laws, potential civil rights violations, the whole package." Marissa's tone sharpened. "You thinking lawsuit?" "Thinking bigger than that," James said. "They humiliated me, sure, but this isn't just about me. This kind of behavior's systemic. I want to make them an example." There was a pause on the line. "I'm in," Marissa said firmly. "Send me everything you've got. We'll draft a game plan first thing in the morning." James exhaled, tension easing slightly from his shoulders. "Thanks, Marissa." "Anytime," she said. They messed with the wrong attorney. After hanging up, James leaned back in his seat. The night air crept through a crack in the window, cooling his simmering frustration. This was only the beginning. The power of momentum. By the next morning, the wheels were already in motion. Marissa had assembled a small but formidable team of legal experts to assess the evidence and craft a strategy. Their initial goal was straightforward: file a formal complaint with the city's Human Rights Commission, alleging discriminatory practices at Étoile Noire. But James wanted more than just a legal victory. He wanted accountability, not just for himself, but for anyone who had ever been made to feel out of place because of the color of their skin. Marissa suggested reaching out to media contacts, and James agreed. He penned a thoughtful but scathing op-ed detailing his experience, framing it within the broader context of ongoing racial bias in luxury spaces. The piece was published in the City Times under the headline, "A Table for One, but Not for Me. The Persistence of Discrimination in High-End Dining." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media lit up with discussions about James's experience, with many sharing their own stories of exclusion and bias in supposedly inclusive spaces. Activists rallied behind James, calling for boycotts and demanding that Etoile Noire address the allegations publicly. Meanwhile, the restaurant's management scrambled to contain the fallout. A spokesperson issued a vague statement expressing regret for any misunderstanding and claiming that Etoile Noire values diversity and inclusion. But James wasn't interested in empty apologies. He wanted change. Real, lasting change. As the legal proceedings moved forward, James and Marissa uncovered troubling patterns in Etoile Noire's hiring practices and customer service protocols. Former employees came forward, describing a culture where subtle racism was tolerated, even encouraged. The case was growing stronger by the day, and James knew that victory was within reach. The storm builds. James sat across from Marissa in her downtown office, the morning sunlight filtering through the wide windows and illuminating stacks of case files scattered across the polished oak table. The hum of downtown traffic below was distant background noise, barely noticeable over the animated conversation between the two attorneys. "We've got more than enough to file the formal discrimination complaint," Marissa said, tapping her pen against a thick folder marked Etoile Noire. "Evidence. But the media attention, that's a game changer. They're already reeling from the backlash." James leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled thoughtfully. "Good, but I want to push this further. Public shame is a start. Legal accountability is next. They need to know there are real consequences for this kind of behavior." Marissa nodded, a gleam of determination in her eyes. "I spoke to a couple of former staff members. One waiter described how Black patrons were routinely seated near the back of the dining room or next to the kitchen doors, even when better tables were available. Another hostess said management used code words to indicate undesirable guests, mostly minorities." James's jaw clenched. The evidence painted a damning picture of systemic discrimination, not just an isolated incident. "What about surveillance footage?" he asked. "Did they comply with our preservation request?" "Not yet, but we're prepared to file a motion to compel," Marissa said confidently. "If they're hiding something, we'll find it." James drummed his fingers on the table. "We also need to keep the public pressure up. People are paying attention now. Let's make sure they don't forget." Marissa grinned. "Already ahead of you. I've got a media strategist on board, someone who knows how to navigate the public relations landscape without compromising the integrity of the case." James nodded appreciatively. He was used to battles fought in courtrooms, but this was different. This was a fight on multiple fronts: legal, social, and cultural. And James was ready for all of it. A shifting narrative. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. News outlets picked up James's story, amplifying it across television, radio, and online platforms. Hashtags like #DineWithDignity and #JusticeForAll trended on social media, sparking conversations about racism in the hospitality industry. Activist groups organized peaceful demonstrations outside Etoile Noire, holding signs that read "Equality at every table" and "No room for racism." The restaurant, once the pinnacle of exclusivity, now found itself synonymous with discrimination and prejudice. Despite the mounting public pressure, Etoile Noire's management maintained a defiant stance. They denied any wrongdoing and insisted that James's experience was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But James knew better. He had seen this playbook before. The denial, the deflection, the refusal to acknowledge systemic issues. It was time to force their hand. The legal offensive. One crisp Monday morning, James and Marissa stood on the courthouse steps, flanked by reporters and photographers eager for a statement. The discrimination lawsuit against Étoile Noire had just been officially filed, alleging violations of both state and federal civil rights laws. Today marks an important step toward justice, James said, his voice steady but resolute. This case isn't just about my experience. It's about ensuring that no one else has to endure humiliation or exclusion based on the color of their skin. Discrimination has no place in our society, and it certainly has no place at our dining tables. Marissa took the microphone next. We have compelling evidence that Étoile Noire engaged in discriminatory practices against Black patrons and other minority groups. We intend to hold them fully accountable under the law. As they walked back toward Marissa's office, James's phone buzzed with messages of support from colleagues, activists, and even strangers who had been moved by his story. But not everyone was supportive. Hate messages flooded his inbox, with anonymous users accusing him of playing the race card and seeking attention. James brushed them off. He had faced worse in his career and knew that backlash was often a sign that real change was on the horizon. Behind closed doors. Meanwhile, inside Étoile Noire's sleek headquarters, panic was palpable. The restaurant's owner, Philip Moreau, paced the boardroom floor, his normally composed demeanor unraveling under the weight of mounting legal and public pressure. "This is a nightmare," Philip muttered, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "Reservations are down by 40%. Investors are getting jittery. And now we're being sued. How did we let it get this bad?" The PR manager, a woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense attitude, cleared her throat. "With all due respect, Philip, this didn't happen overnight. There were warning signs, complaints about discriminatory practices, negative reviews from minority patrons. You ignored them." Philip scowled. "So what do we do now?" "We need to get ahead of this," she said firmly. "Issue a genuine apology, implement diversity training, and maybe partner with community organizations to rebuild trust." Philip bristled at the suggestion. "Apologize? That's as good as admitting guilt." "It's better than bleeding out in the court of public opinion," she retorted, "or losing the lawsuit entirely." Silence hung heavy in the room. "We'll think about it," Philip finally said, though his tone lacked conviction. Turning the tide. Back at Marissa's office, the legal team reviewed the latest developments. "We've got a deposition scheduled with one of their former managers," Marissa informed James. "She's willing to testify about explicit instructions to segregate seating and provide subpar service to minority patrons." "That's huge," James said, feeling a surge of optimism. "It is," Marissa agreed, "but we need to stay vigilant. They'll fight tooth and nail to protect their reputation." James leaned forward, his expression resolute. "Let them. We've come too far to back down now." As the legal battle continued to unfold, James knew that victory wasn't just about winning a lawsuit. It was about setting a precedent, challenging prejudices, and creating a future where dignity and respect were afforded to everyone, regardless of race. The storm was far from over, but James was ready to see it through to the end. A turning point. The energy in Marissa's office was electric as James and the legal team prepared for the deposition of Étoile Noire's former manager, Cynthia Rivera. She had reached out anonymously through a mutual contact, offering crucial information that could blow the case wide open. Marissa tapped the stack of papers in front of her, her expression sharp and focused. If what Cynthia says is true, their entire defense falls apart. James nodded, leaning forward in his chair. "What's her motivation?" "She didn't leave on good terms," Marissa explained. "But more than that, she says she's been carrying guilt for years. She knows what happened was wrong, and this is her chance to make it right." James understood guilt. He'd seen it in witnesses who had stayed silent for too long, only to break under the weight of their conscience. Let's make sure she feels safe enough to tell the truth. At precisely 10 a.m., Cynthia walked into the conference room, a petite woman with dark hair pulled into a neat bun. Her eyes flickered with nervousness, but there was a determination in her step as she took a seat across from James and Marissa. "Thank you for coming," Marissa began, offering a reassuring smile. "We appreciate your courage." Cynthia exhaled shakily. "I just want to do the right thing." James leaned in slightly, his tone gentle but firm. "You're in a safe space here, Cynthia. Just tell us what you know." The testimony. Cynthia's voice steadied as she recounted her years at Détoile and more. "It started subtly," she said. "At first it was just little comments from the owner, Philip. He'd say things like, 'Our clientele expects a certain image,' or 'Let's maintain the brand experience.' I didn't think much of it until I realized what he meant." James exchanged a glance with Marissa. "What do you mean?" "He didn't want black patrons sitting near the front or in prime seating areas," Cynthia explained. "There was this unspoken rule. If someone didn't fit the image, we were supposed to seat them by the kitchen or the back wall." Marissa's pen scratched across her notepad. "Was this policy ever written down?" Cynthia shook her head. "No, it was all verbal. But it was understood, and if anyone questioned it, they didn't last long." James felt a surge of anger, but kept his composure. "What about the staff? Were they complicit?" "Some were," Cynthia admitted. "But others hated it. They just couldn't afford to lose their jobs. I tried to push back a couple of times, but Philip made it clear, if I wanted to keep my position, I had to play along." Marissa leaned forward. "You mentioned earlier that you have documentation." Cynthia nodded, pulling a flash drive from her purse. "I saved emails, meeting notes, even a few text messages from Philip. I didn't know if I'd ever use them, but something told me to hold on to everything." James took the flash drive carefully. "This could be the smoking gun." Cynthia's eyes welled with tears. "I'm sorry I didn't come forward sooner. I was scared." "You're doing the right thing now," James assured her. "And that matters." The fallout begins. By the time Cynthia's deposition was transcribed and submitted as evidence, the case against Détoile Noir had become a legal juggernaut. The media caught wind of Cynthia's testimony, and the story dominated headlines. Former manager exposes discriminatory practices at elite restaurant. Public outrage intensified. Social media exploded with calls for accountability, and high-profile figures weighed in, condemning Étoile Noir's actions. Philip Moreau's attempts at damage control only made things worse. His televised interview, in which he claimed the accusations were baseless and driven by disgruntled former employees, was met with widespread backlash. "Classic denial," Marissa scoffed as she watched the interview on her office monitor. "He's digging his own grave." James smirked. "Let him." The community rallies. Amid the chaos, something remarkable began to happen. Community leaders, activists, and local business owners banded together to support James's fight for justice. A coalition of black-owned restaurants launched a campaign called Tables of Equality, promoting inclusive dining experiences and encouraging patrons to support establishments that valued diversity. James was invited to speak at town hall meetings and legal panels, where he shared his journey and the importance of standing up against discrimination. "It's not just about one restaurant," James said passionately at a community forum. "It's about dismantling the systems that allow prejudice to thrive in places where everyone should feel welcome." The crowd erupted into applause, and James felt a renewed sense of purpose. A critical victory. As the court date loomed, Étoile Noir's legal team sought a settlement. They offered a substantial sum of money and a promise to implement diversity training. Marissa reviewed the offer carefully. "It's tempting," she admitted, "but it doesn't feel like enough." James agreed. "They're just trying to make this go away without admitting guilt. We need more." The decision was clear. They would press forward to trial. When the day finally arrived, the courtroom was packed with journalists, community members, and legal observers. James took his place at the plaintiff's table, his heart steady but resolute. Cynthia's testimony was powerful, bolstered by the evidence she had provided. The emails and text messages revealed a deliberate pattern of discrimination orchestrated by Philip Moreau himself. The defense tried to paint James as an opportunist seeking fame, but his reputation and credibility were unassailable. After days of intense arguments, the jury deliberated for just a few hours before returning with a verdict. Guilty. Étoile Noire was ordered to pay significant damages and implement sweeping changes to its policies, including mandatory diversity training, independent oversight, and a public apology. A new dawn. As James stood on the courthouse steps, surrounded by supporters and reporters, he felt a profound sense of accomplishment. "This isn't just my victory," he said into the microphones. "It belongs to everyone who's ever been made to feel unwelcome, unseen, or unworthy. This is proof that when we stand together and fight for what's right, we can change the world." Marissa clapped him on the back. "We did it," she said, grinning. James smiled. "Yeah, but the work's not over." It never was. Breaking barriers and building bridges. James stood in front of a packed auditorium, the sound of murmured conversations gradually fading as the crowd settled in. The community forum had drawn an even larger turnout than expected, with people of all backgrounds eager to hear from the man who had taken on one of the city's most powerful establishments. And won. He adjusted the microphone, his heart steady despite the intensity of the moment. "Good evening," he began, his voice carrying through the room. "Tonight isn't just about a lawsuit or a legal victory. It's about where we go from here. It's about ensuring that what happened at Étoile Noire doesn't happen anywhere else. Not in restaurants, not in workplaces, not in schools." The audience erupted into applause, many nodding in agreement. James felt a surge of energy, fueled by the collective determination in the room. "I want to be clear," he continued once the applause died down. "This wasn't just my fight. It was a fight for dignity, for respect, and for justice. And it's a fight that belongs to all of us." The ripple effect. In the weeks following the trial, the impact of James's case continued to reverberate across the city and beyond. Étoile Noire, once the pinnacle of exclusivity, had become a cautionary tale for businesses that clung to outdated and discriminatory practices. Philip Moreau, the disgraced owner, had stepped down amid mounting pressure from investors and public backlash. The restaurant's new management team announced sweeping changes, including diversity training and community outreach initiatives designed to rebuild trust. But for James, the victory wasn't just about one restaurant. It was about the doors that had been opened and the conversations that were now happening in boardrooms, classrooms, and dining tables across the country. A movement takes shape. Marissa called James one afternoon with exciting news. "I've been in talks with a few community leaders and civil rights organizations," she said. "They're interested in creating a formal coalition to address discrimination in the hospitality industry." James's eyes lit up. "That's incredible. What's the plan?" "We want you to be a founding member," Marissa said. "Your case was the catalyst for this movement. Having your voice at the table would be invaluable." James didn't hesitate. "Count me in." The coalition, named Dignity in Dining, quickly gained traction. It brought together attorneys, activists, business owners, and policymakers dedicated to promoting inclusivity and fairness in public spaces. One of their first initiatives was a certification program for restaurants that met rigorous standards for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Establishments that earned the certification were celebrated as leaders in the movement toward a more just society. Personal reflections. Despite the whirlwind of events, James made time for introspection. He often thought back to the night at Étoile Noire, the humiliation he had felt as the staff dismissed him and treated him as though he didn't belong. It would have been easy to walk away, to let the experience fester as a personal grievance. But James knew that silence only allowed injustice to thrive. By speaking up and taking action, he had not only found justice for himself, but had also sparked a broader movement. One evening, as he sat on his apartment balcony overlooking the city, Marissa called. "Hey James," she said. "Just wanted to check in. How are you holding up?" "I'm good," he said, smiling. "Better than good, actually. It's been a wild ride. but I wouldn't change a thing." "You should be proud," Marissa said. "What you did, it changed lives." James's voice was quiet but firm. "We changed lives, Marissa. And we're just getting started." Community partnerships. As dignity in dining grew, James and Marissa worked tirelessly to build partnerships with local businesses and organizations. They hosted workshops, led panel discussions, and developed resources to help establishments create inclusive environments. One of their proudest achievements was a mentorship program for young Black professionals interested in the hospitality industry. The program provided training, networking opportunities, and financial support to help participants succeed in a field that had historically marginalized them. "We're not just fighting discrimination," James said during a launch event for the program. "We're creating opportunities. We're building bridges. A new beginning for Étoile Noire." Perhaps the most unexpected development was the transformation of Étoile Noire itself. Under new management, the restaurant had embraced the lessons learned from its fall from grace. James was initially skeptical when the new owner, a Black entrepreneur named Marcus Taylor, reached out to invite him to a reopening event. "I understand if you're not interested," Marcus had said during their phone conversation, "but I want you to see what we've done. This isn't the same place it was before." Curiosity got the better of James, and he agreed to attend. The night of the event, James walked through the familiar doors of Étoile Noire, but everything felt different. The atmosphere was warm and welcoming, with a diverse crowd of patrons filling the elegantly redesigned dining room. Marcus greeted James personally. "Thank you for coming," he said sincerely. "Your courage made this possible." James nodded, feeling a sense of closure. "I'm glad to see the change," he said. "This is what it's all about." As he took a seat at a prime table near the center of the room, James couldn't help but smile. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led to meaningful change, not just for him, but for countless others. A legacy of justice. Later that night, as James reflected on everything that had transpired, he thought about his parents. They had instilled in him a deep sense of justice and the belief that one person could make a difference. He had honored that legacy, and he knew that the work would continue, fueled by the knowledge that standing up for what was right was always worth it. Because sometimes, even in the face of prejudice and injustice, hope and courage could transform the world. Justice beyond the courtroom. The echoes of James's legal victory continued to resonate far beyond the walls of Étoile Noire. For many, his case had become a symbol of hope, proof that even the most entrenched systems of discrimination could be challenged and changed. James returned to his law firm to find his desk stacked with letters from strangers, some offering gratitude, others sharing their own painful experiences of bias and exclusion. A few were simple messages of encouragement. "You fought for all of us. Thank you. Because of you, I found the courage to speak up. We need more lawyers like you." James read each letter carefully, humbled by the trust these individuals had placed in him. He knew their stories deserved justice too, and he was determined to keep fighting. A new case, a new fight. One afternoon, James received a call from an older woman named Evelyn Thomas, who ran a beloved soul food restaurant in the heart of the city. "Mr. Anderson," Evelyn said hesitantly, "I don't know if you can help me, but I didn't know who else to call." "What's going on, Miss Thomas?" James asked, his voice calm and reassuring. Evelyn sighed. "My place, Sweet Harmony. It's been in my family for generations. But lately, we've been getting these strange inspections, code violations that don't make sense. I'm starting to think someone's trying to push us out." James's jaw tightened. "Sounds like harassment. Have you noticed any patterns?" "Funny you should ask," Evelyn said. "There's this new developer buying up all the buildings in the area. They've been real persistent about wanting to buy Sweet Harmony too, but I've said no every time." James didn't need to hear more. "I'll look into it, Miss Thomas. You're not alone in this." Uncovering corruption. It didn't take long for James to connect the dots. The developer, a shadowy corporation with ties to powerful political figures, had been using underhanded tactics to force small businesses out of the neighborhood. "They're trying to gentrify the area," Marissa said as she reviewed the evidence James had gathered. "And they'll do whatever it takes to clear out the original community." James nodded grimly. "Not on my watch." With Marissa's help, James filed a lawsuit against the developer for harassment, illegal business practices, and civil rights violations. The case quickly gained media attention, reigniting public interest in James's work and reinforcing his reputation as a fierce advocate for justice. The community rallies again. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood about James's involvement in Evelyn's case. Community members who had felt powerless against the encroaching gentrification suddenly found hope. "We stand with Sweet Harmony" became a rallying cry as residents organized protests, fundraisers, and social media campaigns to support Evelyn and other small business owners. One Saturday afternoon, James attended a community rally outside Sweet Harmony. The scent of fried chicken and collard greens wafted through the air as Evelyn served plates of food to the gathered crowd. "Thank you, Mr. Anderson," Evelyn said, her voice thick with emotion. "You didn't have to do this, but you did, and we'll never forget it." James smiled. "It's not just me. It's all of us standing together." The courtroom showdown. The courtroom was packed as the case against the developer went to trial. James stood confidently before the judge, laying out a compelling argument backed by mountains of evidence. Evelyn's testimony was especially powerful. "This restaurant is my family's legacy," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "We've fed this community through good times and bad. We're not just a business, we're a home." The defense tried to discredit her, painting her as a stubborn business owner unwilling to adapt to progress. But James dismantled their arguments with precision, exposing the developer's illegal tactics and unethical practices. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict in favor of Evelyn and the other business owners. The developer was ordered to cease all harassment, pay substantial damages, and abandon plans to redevelop the neighborhood. A victory for the people. The courtroom erupted into cheers as the verdict was read. Evelyn hugged James tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You did it," she whispered. "We did it," James corrected with a smile. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for interviews. James spoke passionately about the importance of preserving communities and fighting against greed and corruption. "This victory belongs to the people," he said firmly. "It's a reminder that justice isn't just a word, it's a right. And when we stand together, we can protect what matters most." A legacy of justice and hope. In the weeks that followed, Sweet Harmony became a symbol of resilience and hope. Business boomed as customers flocked to support Evelyn and celebrate the restaurant's triumph. James knew there would be more battles ahead, but he welcomed the challenge. Each case, each fight, was a step toward a world where dignity and justice were not just ideals but realities. One evening, as he walked past Sweet Harmony, Evelyn waved him inside. "Sit down and eat, hero," she said with a grin. James laughed. "Only if you're joining me." As they shared a meal, James felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The fight for justice was never over, but moments like this made it all worthwhile. He had taken humiliation and turned it into triumph, not just for himself, but for countless others. And he was just getting started. A new era of justice. Months had passed since the victory for Evelyn and the other small business owners. Sweet Harmony had become a beacon of community pride, drawing both loyal patrons and curious newcomers eager to experience the legacy that James Anderson had helped protect. The case had left an indelible mark on the city, inspiring neighborhoods to stand up against unfair practices and emboldening other attorneys to champion civil rights cases. James had become a symbol of justice, a voice for the unheard, and a shield for the vulnerable. But he wasn't interested in personal fame. His eyes remained fixed on the future and the work that still needed to be done. A new challenge. One chilly morning, Marissa barged into James's office without knocking, a familiar glint of urgency in her eyes. "You're going to want to see this," she said, dropping a thick folder onto his desk. James raised an eyebrow. "Good morning to you too." "No time for pleasantries," Marissa shot back, flipping open the folder. "There's a new housing policy proposal on the table. If it passes, it'll displace thousands of low-income families from historically black neighborhoods." James scanned the documents, his brow furrowing with each page. The policy was cloaked in bureaucratic language, but its intent was clear: gentrification disguised as urban development. "They think they can hide this behind fancy wording," James muttered, "but it's just another land grab." Marissa nodded grimly. "We need to stop it before it gains traction." James leaned back in his chair, the fire of determination igniting once again. "Let's get to work." Strategizing for change, James and Marissa assembled a coalition of community leaders, activists, and legal experts to fight the policy. They knew that stopping it would require more than just legal arguments. It would take a full-scale campaign to educate the public and mobilize support. Public forums were held in churches, schools, and community centers. James spoke passionately about the dangers of the proposed policy, urging residents to make their voices heard. "This isn't just about zoning laws," he said during one packed meeting. "It's about whether we value people or profits. It's about fighting for the right to call this city home." The crowd erupted in applause, energized by James's unwavering commitment. A groundswell of support. The campaign gained momentum as media outlets picked up the story. Headlines read, "Attorney James Anderson leads fight against displacement policy." Community rallies to protect historic neighborhoods. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #OurHomesMatter and #StandWithJames. Celebrities, activists, and even city officials voiced their support, putting pressure on lawmakers to reconsider the proposal. Evelyn Thomas, ever the fierce advocate, became a prominent figure in the movement. "They tried to take my restaurant, and now they want to take our homes," she said during a televised interview. "But we're not going anywhere." Victory in the council chamber. The culmination of the fight took place in the city council chamber, where James stood before a panel of officials to present the community's case. He spoke with passion and precision, weaving together legal arguments, personal stories, and hard data. "This policy is not just misguided, it's unjust," he declared. "If passed, it will erase generations of history and community. We cannot let that happen." The council members listened intently, the weight of the moment palpable. After hours of deliberation, the decision was announced. The policy was defeated. Cheers erupted in the chamber, with hugs and handshakes exchanged among the jubilant crowd. James stood tall, his heart swelling with pride. The legacy of leadership. In the days that followed, James reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. What had started as a humiliating encounter at a luxury restaurant had evolved into a transformative fight for justice. He had faced prejudice, corruption, and greed, and emerged victorious, not just for himself, but for countless others. One evening, Marissa joined James for dinner at Sweet Harmony. As they ate, Evelyn approached their table with a broad smile. "You two are a force to be reckoned with," she said warmly. "This city owes you a debt of gratitude." James shook his head modestly. "It's not about me, Evelyn. It's about all of us standing together. And that's why it'll always win," Evelyn said with a knowing nod. Looking forward. As James walked through the neighborhood that night, he saw the fruits of their labor. Families gathered on porches, children playing in the streets, small businesses thriving. The city was far from perfect, but it was better. And James knew it could be better still. His phone buzzed with a new message from Marissa. Another potential case just came in. "Want to talk strategy tomorrow?" James smiled, typing back a quick response. Always. Because for James Anderson, the fight for justice was never over. And as long as there were battles to be fought, he would be there, ready to stand, ready to lead, and ready to transform lives.